Hello, good morning. Happy Saturday. Thank you for the host, Caden. Thank you for the host, Tara and Riddy. I really appreciate all of y'all. I hope you're having good mornings so far. Sorry I'm a bit late. I got caught up doing some other things. But we're here now. So we're going to read a little bit. Don't have a ton to say other than hello, good morning, and I hope you're all doing well. I really appreciate all of you very much. Wanted to say that again. Yay for reading. I plan to do 4 more chapters today, which will be chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then when we come back for the 3rd time, I'll do chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13. I am a super noob and forgot to update it. So I did update it after I went live, and hopefully that'll update soon on mobile. So that's okay, Riddy. I understand it's still early for you. I just appreciate you coming by. I'm going to move my mic, so excuse any weird noises. Okay, I'm glad it's updated for you, Tara. It must be just slow on mobile because Twitch mobile is poop. Alright, so without any further hubbub, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Let me know if I need to change music or anything like that, but we're gonna just jump right back in. Chapter 6. You youngsters look very spiffy in those helmets, Phil said with a wide, optimistic smile on his face. I know you must be a little nervous, but I'm sure all of you children will rise to the occasion. The Baudelaire orphans sighed and looked at one another from inside their diving helmets. When someone tells you that you will rise to the occasion, it means they think you'll be strong or skillful enough for a particular situation. But Violet, Klaus, and Sunny did not know if they could rise to the occasion when they were so afraid of sinking. Although they had dragged their helmets back and forth to the barracks, they hadn't realized how awkward they were until they had strapped them onto their waterproof uniforms. Violet did not like the fact that she couldn't reach through the helmet to tie up her hair, in case she needed to invent something on the spur of the moment, a phrase which here means while traveling through the Gorgonian Grotto. Klaus found that it was difficult to see, as the small circular window in his helmet interfered with his glasses. And Sunny was not at all happy about curling up inside her helmet, shutting the tiny door, and being carried by her sister as if she were a volleyball instead of a young girl. When they had put their uniforms on just a few hours earlier, the three siblings thought that the waterproof suits had fit them like a glove, but now as they followed Captain Wittershins out of the main hall and down the damp and dripping corridor, the children feared that the uniforms fit more like an anchor, dragging them down to the depths of the sea. "Don't worry," Fiona said as though she were reading the Baudelaire's minds. She gave the siblings a small smile from behind her diving helmet. "I assure you that these suits are completely safe. Safe, but uncomfortable." "As long as we can breathe," Violet said. "I don't care how uncomfortable they are." "Of course you'll be able to breathe," the helmet said. "Aye, the oxygen systems in your helmets provide plenty of air for a short journey. Of course, if there's any opportunity to remove your helmets, you should do so. Aye, that way the system can recharge itself and you'll have more air." "Where would we find an opportunity to remove our helmets in an underwater cave?" Klaus asked. "Who knows?" Captain Wittershins said. "Aye, you'll be in uncharted waters. I wish I could go myself, aye, but the grotto has become too narrow." "Hugh and Kella," Sunny said. Her voice was muffled inside the helmet, and it was difficult for even her siblings to know what she was saying. "I think my sister is curious about how we'll be able to see our way," Violet said. "Does the Queequeg have any waterproof flashlights?" "Flashlights won't help you," the captain replied. "Aye, it's too dark. Aye, but you won't need to see your way. Aye. If Klaus's calculations are correct, the tide will just push you along. Aye, you won't even have to swim. You can just sit there and you'll drift right to the sugar bowl." "That seems like an awfully passive way to travel," Fiona said. "Aye," her stepfather agreed. "It does, but there is no other solution, and we should not hesitate." He stopped and pointed to his plaque. "He or she who hesitates is lost," he reminded them. "It's a little hard not to hesitate," Violet said, "before doing something like this." "It's not too late to draw straws," the captain said. "Aye, you don't all have to go together." "The three of us prefer not to be separated," Klaus said. "We've had too much trouble that way." "I should think you've had too much trouble in any case," the captain said. "Aye." "The Baudelaire's are right, stepfather," Fiona said. "This way makes the most sense. We may need Violet's mechanical expertise, or Klaus's knowledge of the title charts, and Sunny's size may come in handy if the grotto gets even smaller." "Ulp," Sunny said, which meant something like, "I don't like the idea of drifting by myself in a diving helmet." "What about you, Fiona?" the captain asked. "Aye, you could stay here with me." "My skills might be needed as well," Fiona said quietly, and the Baudelaire shuddered, trying not to think about the medusoid mycelium and its poisonous spores. "Aye," Captain Wittershins admitted, and smoothed his mustache with one gloved finger. "Well, I'm going to tell VFD all about this. Aye, all 4 of you volunteers will receive citations for bravery." The Baudelaires looked at one another as best they could through the small circular windows. A citation for bravery is nothing more than a piece of paper stating that you have been courageous at some time, and such citations have not been known to be very useful when confronted by danger, whether deep underwater or, as the Baudelaires would eventually learn, high up in the air. Anyone can write up a citation for bravery, and I have even been known to write up one for myself from time to time, in order to keep up my spirits in the middle of a treacherous journey. The 3 siblings were more interested in surviving their voyage through the Gorgonian Grotto than in receiving a written statement complimenting them on their courage, but they knew Captain Wittershins was trying to keep their spirits up as he led them down the corridor and into the room where they had first encountered the captain of the Queequeg. "To get into the water," the captain said, "you just climb up that same ladder and give a hollow when you're at the hatch. Then I'll activate a valve down here so the submarine won't flood with water when you open it. Then, as I said, you'll just let the current carry you. You should end up in the same place as the sugar bowl." "And you still won't tell us why the sugar bowl's important?" Violet couldn't help asking. "It's not the sugar bowl," Captain Wittershins said. "It's what's inside it. Aye. I've already said too much. Aye, there are secrets in this world too terrible for young people to know." Just think, if you knew about the sugar bowl, and you somehow fell into Count Olaf's clutches, there's no telling what he'd do, But look on the bright side, Phil pointed out. Whatever terrible things may be lurking in that cave, you won't find Count Olaf. There's no way that octopus submarine could fit. Aye, the captain agreed. But we'll watch for him on the sonar, just in case. We'll watch you too. Aye, we'll be right here watching you the entire time. The oxygen systems in your helmets make enough noise that you'll appear as 4 tiny dots on our screen. Now, off you go. Good luck. We'll be wishing you the best, Phil said. The adults gave each of the children a pat on the helmet, and without any further hesitation, off went the Baudelaire children with Fiona behind them, following the ladder up to the hatch through which they had come aboard. The 4 volunteers were quiet as they made their way up until Violet reached up with one hand. The other hand was clutching Sunny's helmet, and grabbed the handle that opened the hatch. "We're ready," she called down, although she did not feel ready at all. "Aye," replied the voice of the captain. "I'm activating the valve now. Wait 5 seconds and then open the hatch. Aye, but don't hesitate. Aye, he who hesitates is lost, aye. Or she, aye. Good luck, aye. Good fortune, aye. Good journey, aye, and goodbye." There was a distant clanging, presumably the sound of the valve activating, and the 4 children waited for 5 seconds, just as you may wish to wait a few seconds yourself, so that all thoughts of the Baudelaire's predicament will vanish from your imagination, so that you will not be weeping as you learn several boring facts about the water cycle. The water cycle, to review, consists of 3 key phenomena: evaporation, precipitation, and collection, all of which are equally boring and thus equally less upsetting than what happened to the Baudelaires when Violet opened the hatch and the icy dark waters of the sea rushed into the passageway. If you were to read what happened to them in the moments that followed, you would find yourself unable to sleep as you wept into your pillow and pictured the children all alone in that grim grotto, drifting slowly to the end of the cavern. And yet, if you read about the water cycle, you would find yourself unable to stay awake, due to the boring description of the process by which water is distributed around the world. And so, as a courtesy to you, I will continue this book in a way that is best for all concerned. The water cycle consists of 3 phenomena: evaporation, precipitation, and collection, which are the 3 phenomena that make up what is known as the water cycle. Evaporation, the first of these phenomena, is the process of water turning into vapor and eventually forming clouds, such as those found in cloudy skies, or on cloudy days, or even cloudy nights. These clouds are formed by a phenomenon known as the evaporation, which is the first of 3 phenomena which make up the water cycle. Evaporation, the first of these 3, is simply a term for a process by which water turns into vapor and eventually forms clouds. Clouds can be recognized by their appearance, usually on cloudy days or nights when they can be seen in cloudy skies. The name for the process in which clouds are formed by water, which turns into vapor and becomes part of the formation known as clouds, is evaporation. The first phenomena and the 3 phenomena that make up the cycle of water, otherwise known as the water cycle, and surely you must be asleep by now so you can be spared the horrifying details of the Baudelaire's journey. The instant Violet opened the hatch, the passageway flooded with water, and the children drifted out of the submarine and into the blackness of the Gorgonian grotto. The Baudelaires knew, of course, that the Queequeg had entered an underwater cave, but they still were unprepared for how very dark and cold it was. Sunlight had not reached the waters of the grotto for quite some time, not since Anne Whistle Aquatics was still up and running, a phrase which here means not destroyed under suspicious circumstances. And the water felt like a freezing black glove encircling the children with its chilly fingers. As Klaus had predicted after studying the tidal charts, the currents of the cave carried the youngsters away from the submarine, but in the darkness it was impossible to see how fast or far they were going. Within moments, the 4 volunteers lost sight of the Queequeg and then of one another. Had the grotto been equipped with some sort of lighting system, as it once had, the children might have seen a number of things. They might have noticed the mosaic on the grotto floor, thousands and thousands of colorful tiles depicting noble events from the early history of a secret organization, and portraits of famous writers, scientists, artists, musicians, philosophers, and chefs who had inspired the organization's members. They might have seen an enormous rusted pumping machine, which was able to drain the entire grotto or flood it with seawater again in mere minutes. They might have gazed upward and seen the sharp angles of various vertical flame diversions and other secret passageways that once led up all the way to the Marine Research Center and Rhetorical Advice Service, or even spotted the person who was using one of those passageways right now, and probably for the last time, as she made her difficult and dark way toward the Queequeg. But instead, all the children could see through their small circular windows was darkness. The Baudelaires had seen darkness before, of course. Darkness in secret passageways and tunnels, darkness in abandoned buildings and empty streets, darkness in the eyes of wicked people, and even darkness in other caves. But never before had the orphans felt so completely in the dark as they did now. They did not know where they were, although once Violet felt very briefly her feet brush up against something very smooth, like a tile fitted firmly against the ground. They could not tell where they were going, although after a while Klaus had a suspicion that the current had spun him so he was traveling upside down. Although they could not tell when they would arrive, although from time to time Sunny saw through her diving helmet a tiny dot of light, much like the tiny dots Captain Wittersham said they would appear as on the sonar screen of his submarine. The Baudelaires drifted along in cold, dark silence, feeling afraid and confused and strangely lonely, and when their journey finally ended, it was so sudden it felt as if they'd fallen into a deep, deep sleep, as deep and dark as the cavern itself, and now were being jolted awake. At first it sounded as if a bushel of broken glass were raining down upon the children, but then the children realized they had drifted to the surface of the water, and in one curling, fluid motion, the tide pushed them onto something that felt like a beach, and the three siblings found themselves crawling on a slope of dark, wet sand. "Klaus?" Violet called through her helmet. "Are you there? What's happened?" "I don't know," Klaus replied. He could just barely see his sister crawling alongside him. "We couldn't have reached the surface of the sea. We were very, very deep. Is Sunny with you?" "Yes," Sunny said from inside her helmet. "Fiona?" "I'm here," came the voice of the mycologist. "But where are we? How can we still be below the surface of the sea without any water around us?" "I'm not sure," Klaus said, "but it must be possible. After all, a submarine can be below the sea and stay dry." "Are we on another submarine?" Violet asked. "I dunno," Sunny said, and frowned in her helmet. "Look!" The elder Baudelaires looked, although it took them a few moments to realize what Sunny was talking about, as they could not see what direction their sister was pointing. But in a moment they saw two small lights, a short distance from where the volunteers were crawling. Hesitantly they stood up, except for Sunny, who remained curled up in her helmet, and saw that the lights were coming from a place many lights come from. Lamps. A short distance away, standing against the wall, were 3 floor lamps, each with a letter on its shade. The first lamp had a large V, and the second had an F. The third floor lamp had burnt out and was too dim to read the shade, but the children knew, of course, it must have had a D. "What is this place?" Fiona asked, but as the children stepped closer, they could see what kind of a place it was. As they had suspected, the currents of the Gregorian grotto had carried them to a beach, but it was a beach contained in a narrow room. The youngsters stood at the top of the slope of sand and peered at this small, dim room, with smooth tiled walls that looked damp and slippery, and a sand floor covered in an assortment of small objects, some in piles and some half buried in sand. The children could see bottles, some still with their corks and caps, and some cans still intact from their journey. There were a few books, their pages bloated as if soaked in water, and a few small cases that looked locked. There was a roller skate turned upside down, and a deck of cards sitting in 2 piles, as if someone were about to shuffle them. Here and there were a few pens sticking out of the sand like porcupine quills, and there were many more objects the children could not identify in the gloom. "Where are we?" Fiona asked. "Why isn't this place full of water?" Klaus looked up and could not see past a few feet. "This must be a passage of some sort," Klaus said, "straight up to dry land. An island maybe, or maybe it curves to the shore." "And Whistle Aquatics," Violet said thoughtfully. "We must be underneath its ruins." "Oxo?" Sunny asked, which meant, does that mean we can breathe without our helmets? "I think so," Klaus said, and then carefully removed his helmet, an action for which I would have given him a citation for bravery. "Yes," he said, "we can breathe. Everybody take off their helmets. That way our oxygen systems will recharge. But what is this place? Fiona asked again, removing her helmet. Why would anybody build a room way down here? It looks like it's been abandoned, Violet said. It's full of junk. Someone must come to change the light bulbs, Klaus pointed out. Besides, all this junk was washed up here by the tide like us. And like Sugar Bowl, Sunny said. Of course, Fiona said, looking down at the objects in the sand. It must be here someplace. Let's find it and get out of here, Violet said. I don't like this place. Mission, Sunny said, which meant once we find the Sugar Bowl, our work here is done. Not quite, Klaus said. We'll still have to return to the Queequeg, against the current, I might add. Looking for the Sugar Bowl is only half that battle. Everyone nodded in agreement, and the 4 volunteers spread out and began to examine the objects in the sand. Saying that something is half the battle is like saying something is half a sandwich, because it is dangerous to announce that something is half the battle when the much more difficult part might still be waiting in the wings, a phrase which here means coming up more quickly than you'd like. You might think learning how to boil water is half the battle, only to learn that making a poached egg is much trickier than you thought. You might think that climbing a mountain is half the battle, only to find out that the mountain goats who live at the top are vicious and heavily armed. And you might think that rescuing a kidnapped ichnologist is half the battle, only to discover that making a poached egg is much trickier than you thought, and that the entire battle would be much more difficult and dangerous than you would have ever imagined. The Baudelaires and their mycologist friend thought that looking for the Sugar Bowl was half the battle, but I'm sorry to tell you that they were wrong, and it is lucky that you have fallen asleep earlier during my description of the water cycle, so you will not learn about the other half of the Baudelaire's battle, and the ghastly poison they would end up battling not long after their search through the sand. I found a box of rubber bands, Violet said after a few minutes, and a doorknob, 2 mattress springs, half a bottle of vinegar, and a paring knife, but no Sugar Bowl. I found an earring, a broken clipboard, a book of poetry, half a stapler, and 3 swizzle sticks, Klaus said, but no Sugar Bowl. 3 canned soup, Sunny said, jar peanut butter, box crackers, pesto, wasabi, lo mein, but no sucre. This is harder than I thought, Klaus said. What have you found, Fiona? Fiona did not answer. Fiona? Klaus asked again, and the Baudelaires turned to look at her. But the mycologist was not looking at the siblings. She was looking past them, and her eyes were wide with fear behind her triangular glasses. Fiona? Klaus said, sounding a bit worried. What have you found? Fiona swallowed and pointed back down at the slope of sand. Mycelium, she said finally in a faint whisper, and the Baudelaires turned to see she had spoken the truth. Sprouting out of the sand, quickly and silently, were stalks and caps of the medusoid mycelium, the fungus Fiona had described back on the Queequeg. The invisible threads of the mycelium, according to her mycological book, waxed and waned, and had been waning when the volunteers drifted ashore, which meant that the mushrooms had been hiding underground when the children had arrived at this strange room. But now as time passed, they were waxing, and sprouting up all over the beach, and even along the smooth tiled walls. At first, just a handful were visible, each one a dark gray color, with black splotches on the caps as if they were spattered with ink. And then more and more, like a silent, deadly crowd that had gathered on the beach and was staring blindly at the terrified children. The mushrooms only ventured halfway up the slope of sand, so it seemed that the poisonous fungus was not going to engulf them, not yet anyway. But as the mycelium continued to wax, the entire beach sprouted in sinister mushrooms, and until it waned, the Baudelaires had to huddle on the sand in the light of the floor lamps and stare back at the venomous mycological crowd. More and more mushrooms appeared, crowding the strange shore and piling up on top of one another as if they were pushing and shoving to get a good look at the trapped and frightened children. Looking for the Sugar Bowl may have been half the battle, but now the Baudelaire orphans were trapped, and this half was much, much more troubling. It's the end of chapter 6. Let me catch up. My day's going good, but my guitar isn't. Uh-oh. You're trying to learn through Fire and the Flames? Whew! I said the captain as he took a big drink. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Ah, everything's fine. I'm only on episode 3, so no spoilers. That's okay, I haven't finished the series either.
She'll be fine. Everything's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Well, it's fine. She'll be fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
I am in the first 3 episodes, I believe, a few times. Yeah, I think episode 2 is where you can see me the best. I learned this ages ago in geography. I don't need another lesson. I'm really glad, Caden, that you're getting back into the series. G.I. Joe always said it was half the battle. Half a sandwich! Riddy has an emote for everything. It isn't really a sugar bowl, is it? Spoiler, Snicket, gosh. Goat's heavily armed with guns. Oh yeah, Caden, it wasn't you giving spoilers, it was Snicket giving spoilers in his own book. No, what happens at the end? No, you don't go that far. Run away! Thank you for the claps. Alright. My stomach is growling because I haven't eaten anything yet today. And a big dance number. Dang it. You know. Alright, moving along. Chapter 7. The word lousy, like the word volunteer, the word fire, the word department, and many other words found in dictionaries and other important documents, has a number of different definitions, depending on the exact circumstances in which it's used. There is the common definition of the word lousy, which means bad, and this definition of lousy has described many things in my history of the Baudelaire orphans. From the sinister smells of Lousy Lane, along which the children traveled long ago, to their lousy journey up and down the Mortmain Mountains in search of the VFD headquarters. There is the medical definition of the word lousy, meaning infested with lice, and this definition of lousy has not appeared in my work at all, although as Count Olaf's hygiene gets worse and worse, I might find an occasion to use it. And then there is a somewhat obscure definition of the word lousy, meaning abundantly supplied, the way Count Olaf is lousy with treacherous plans, or the Queequeg is lousy with metal pipes, or the entire world is lousy with unfathomable secrets. And it is this definition that the Baudelaire orphans pondered as they huddled with Fiona underneath the mysterious floor lamps of the Gorgonian Grotto, and watched more and more mushrooms sprout from the sand. As their surroundings became lousy with the medusoid mycelium, the children thought of all the other things in their lives with which they were abundantly supplied. The children's lives were lousy with mystery, from the mysteries of VFD to the mysteries of their own futures, with each mystery crowding the others like the stalks and caps of the poisonous fungi. Their lives were lousy with danger, from the dangers they had encountered above mountains and underneath buildings, to the dangers they had faced inside the city and out in the hinterlands, from the dangers of villainous people to the dangers of kind people who did not know any better. And their lives were lousy with lousiness, from terrible people to horrible meals, from terrifying locations to horrifying circumstances, and from dreadful inconveniences to inconvenient dreads, so that it seemed that their lives would always be lousy. Lousy with lousy days and lousy with lousy nights, even if all of the lousy things with which their lives were lousy became less lousy and less lousy with lousiness over the lousy course of each lousy with lousiness moment, and with each new lousy mushroom, making this cave lousier and lousier with lousiness. It was almost too much for the Baudelaire orphans to bear. Lousy, Sonny said. This is not good news, Klaus agreed. Fiona, do you think we've been poisoned already? No, Fiona said firmly. The spores shouldn't reach us here. As long as we stay here at the far end of the cavern and the mushrooms don't advance any further, we should be safe. It looks like they've stopped advancing. Violet said, pointing at the line of gray mushrooms, and the other volunteers saw she was right. There were still new mushrooms popping up, but the fungus didn't seem to be getting any closer to the 4 children. I guess the mycelium has only grown that far, Fiona said. We're very lucky. I don't feel very lucky, Klaus said. I feel trapped. How will we get out of here? There's only one way, Violet said. The only path back to the Queequeg leads through those mushrooms. If we go through the mushrooms, Fiona said, we'll most likely be poisoned. One spore could easily slip through our suits. Antidote? Sunny asked. I might find the recipe for a cure, Fiona replied, someplace in my mycological library, but we don't want to take that chance. We'll have to exit another way. For a moment, all 4 children looked up into the blackness of the passage above their heads. Violet frowned and put one hand on the damp and slippery tiles of the wall. With the other hand, she reached into the waterproof pocket of her uniform and drew out a ribbon to tie up her hair. Can we go out that way? Klaus asked. Can you invent something to help us climb up that passageway? Ting game bob, Sunny said, which meant there's plenty of materials here in the sand. Materials aren't the problem, Violet said, and peered up into the blackness. We are far below the surface of the water. It could be miles and miles to the surface. Even the best climbing device would wear out over that journey, and if it did, we'd fall all the way down. But someone must use that passageway, Klaus said, otherwise it wouldn't have been built. It doesn't matter, Fiona said. We can't go out that way. We need to get to the Queequeg. Otherwise my stepfather will wonder what's become of us. Eventually he'd put on his diving helmet and go investigate. And the tide would carry him right into this fungus. Klaus finished. Fiona's right. Even if we could climb all the way up, it'd be the wrong way to go. But what else can we do? Violet said, her voice rising. We can't spend the rest of our lives in this miserable place. Fiona looked at the mushrooms and sighed. Mushroom Minute says that this fungus waxes and wanes. Right now it's waxing. We'll have to wait until it wanes again and then run quickly over the sand and swim back down to the submarine. But how long will it be till it starts waning? Klaus said. I don't know, Fiona admitted. It could be a few minutes or a few hours. It could be a few days. A few days, Violet said. In a few days, your stepfather will give up on us. In a few days, we'll miss the VFD gathering. We can't wait a few days. It's our only choice, Klaus said, putting a comforting hand on Violet's shoulder. We can wait until the mushrooms disappear or we can find ourselves poisoned. That's not a choice at all, Violet replied bitterly. It's a Hobson's choice, Klaus said. Remember? The eldest Baudelaire looked down at her brother and gave him a small smile. Of course I remember, she said. Mama-san, Sunny said. Her siblings looked down at her and Violet picked her up in her arms. Who's Hobson? Fiona asked, and what was his choice? Klaus smiled. Thomas Hobson lived in Britain in the 17th century, he said. He was in charge of a stable, and according to legend, he always told his customers they had a choice. They could take the horse closest to the door, or no horse at all. That's not really a choice, Fiona said. Violet smiled. Precisely, she said. A Hobson's choice is something that's not a choice at all. It's an expression our mother used to use. She'd say, I'll give you a Hobson's choice, Violet. You can clean your room, or I will stand in the doorway and sing your least favorite song over and over. Fiona grinned. What was your least favorite song? She asked. Row, row, row your boat, Violet said. I hate that part about life being but a dream. She'd offer me the Hobson's choice of doing the dishes or reading the poetry of Edgar Guest, Klaus said. He's my absolute least favorite poet. Bath or pink dress, Sunny said. Did your mother always joke around like that? Fiona asked. Mine used to get awfully mad if I didn't clean my room. Our mother would get mad too, Klaus said. Remember, Violet, when we left the window of the library open and that night it rained? She really flew off the handle, Violet said, using a phrase which here means became extremely angry. We spoiled an atlas that she said was irreplaceable. You should have heard her yell, Klaus said. Our father came down from his study to see what was the matter. And then he started yelling too, Violet said, and the Baudelaires paused and looked at one another uncomfortably. Everyone yells, of course, from time to time, but the Baudelaire children did not like to think about their parents yelling, particularly now that they were no longer around to apologize or explain themselves. It is often difficult to admit that someone you love is not perfect, or to consider aspects of a person that are less than admirable. To the Baudelaires, it felt almost as if they had drawn a line after their parents died, a secret line in their memories, separating all the wonderful things about the Baudelaire parents from the things that perhaps were not quite so wonderful. Since the fire, whenever they thought of their parents, the Baudelaires never stepped over this secret line, preferring to ponder the best moments the family had together, rather than any of the times when they had fought or been unfair or selfish. But now, suddenly, in the gloom of the Gorgonian grotto, the siblings had stumbled across that line and found themselves thinking of that angry afternoon in the library, and in moments other angry afternoons and evenings had occurred to them until their brains were lousy with memories of all stripes, a phrase which here means both bad and good. It gave the siblings a queasy feeling to cross this line in their memories and admit that their parents were sometimes difficult, and it made them feel all the queasier to realize they could not step back and pretend they had never remembered these less than perfect moments, any more than they could step back in time and once again find themselves safe in the Baudelaire home, before fire and Count Olaf had appeared in their lives. "My brother used to get angry too," Fiona said. "Before he disappeared, he would have awful fights with my stepfather, late at night when they thought I was asleep." "Your stepfather didn't mention that," Violet said. "He said your brother was a charming man." "Maybe he only remembers the charming parts," Fiona replied. "Maybe he doesn't want to remember everything. Maybe he wants to keep those parts secret." "Do you think your stepfather knew about this place?" Klaus asked, looking around the eerie room. "He mentioned that we might find a place to take off our diving helmets, remember? It seemed strange at the time." "I don't know," Fiona said. "Maybe that's another secret he's been keeping." "Like the sugar bowl," Violet said. "Speaking which," Sunny said. "Sunny's right," Klaus said. "We should keep looking for the sugar bowl." "It must be here someplace," Fiona agreed. "And besides, we need some way to pass the time until the fungus wanes. Everyone should spread out and give a shout if you find the sugar bowl." The Baudelaires nodded in agreement, and the 4 volunteers took distant positions on the sand, taking care not to step any closer to the medusoid mycelium. For the next few hours, they dug through the sand floor of the grotto and examined what they found by the light of the 2 floor lamps. Each layer of sand uncovered several items of interest, but no matter how many objects the children encountered, no one gave a shout. Violet found a butter dish, a length of electrical wire, and an odd square stone with messages carved in 3 languages, but not what she was looking for, and so the eldest Baudelaire remained silent. Klaus found a box of toothpicks, a small hand puppet, and a ring made of dull metal, but not what he had come to the cave to find, so the middle Baudelaire merely sighed. And Sunny found 2 cloth napkins, a broken telephone receiver, and a fancy wine glass filled with holes. But when she finally opened her mouth to speak, the youngest Baudelaire merely said, "Snack," which meant something like, "Why don't we stop for a bite to eat?" and quickly opened the crackers and peanut butter she had found. "Thanks, Sunny," Fiona said, taking a cracker spread with peanut butter. "I must say, Baudelaires, I'm getting frustrated. My hands ache from all that digging, and there's no sign of this sugar bowl." "I'm beginning to think this is a fool's errand," Violet said, using a phrase which here means errand performed by a fool. "We journeyed all the way down here to find a crucial item, and instead it seems we're finding nothing but junk. It's a waste of time." "Not necessarily," Klaus said, eating a cracker and looking at the items he'd found. "We may not have found the sugar bowl, but I think we did find some crucial information." "What do you mean?" Violet said. "Look at this," Klaus said, and held up a book he'd taken from the sand. "It's a collection of poetry, and most of it is too damp to read, but look at the title page." The middle Baudelaire held open the book so the other volunteers could see. "Versed Furtive Disclosure," Violet read out loud. "VFD," Sunny said. "Yes," Klaus said. "Furtive means secretive, and disclosure means to reveal something. I think VFD may have hidden things here, not just the sugar bowl, but other secrets." "That would make sense," Violet said. "This grotto is a bit like a secret passageway, like the one we found underneath our home, or the one Quigley found underneath his." Fiona nodded and began to search through the pile of items she had taken from the sand. "I found an envelope earlier," she said, "but I didn't think to open it. I was too busy concentrating on the sugar bowl." "Punctilio," Sunny said, holding up a torn and tattered sheet of newspaper. The children could see the letters VFD circled in the headline. "I'm too exhausted to dig anymore," Violet said. "Let's spend some time reading instead. Klaus, you can examine that poetry book. Fiona, you can see if there's anything worthwhile in that envelope." and I'll take a look at the clipping Sunny found. Me? Asked Sunny, whose reading skills were still developing. Why don't you cook us something, Sunny? Klaus suggested with a smile. Those crackers just whetted my appetite. Pronto, the youngest Baudelaire promised, looking at the foodstuffs she had found in the sand, most of which were sealed up tight. The phrase whet my appetite, as you probably know, refers to one's hunger being awakened, and it usually refers to food. The Baudelaires had lost track of time while searching through the sand of the grotto, and the snack Sunny prepared made them realize just how long it had been since they'd eaten. But another appetite had been whetted for the Baudelaires as well, a hunger for secrets, and for information that might help them. As Sunny began to prepare a meal for her fellow volunteers, Violet and Klaus looked over the materials they had found, devouring whatever information seemed important, and Fiona did the same thing, leaning up against the tiled wall of the cavern as she examined the contents of the envelope she had found. The volunteers' hunger for information was almost as fierce as their hunger for food, and after a lengthy period of studying and note-taking, whisking and mixing, the four children could not say whether they were more eager to hear about the others' research or to eat the meal Sunny had just prepared. What is this? Violet asked her sister, peering into the fishbowl Sunny was using as a serving dish. Pesto lo mein, Sunny explained. What my sister means, Klaus said, is that she found a package of soft Chinese noodles, which she tossed with an Italian basil sauce she got out of a jar. That's quite an international combination, Fiona said. Hobson, Sunny said, which meant I didn't have much choice given our surroundings, and then held up another item she'd found. Wasabi? What's wasabi? Violet asked. It's a Japanese condiment, Klaus said. It's very spicy, and it's often served with fish. Why don't we save the wasabi, Sunny? Violet said, taking the tin of wasabi and putting it in the pocket of her uniform. We'll take it back to the Queequeg, and you can use it in a seafood recipe. Sunny nodded in agreement and passed the fishbowl to her siblings. Utensi, she said. We can use these swizzle sticks as chopsticks, Klaus said. We'll have to take turns, and whoever isn't eating can tell us what they've discovered. Here, Fiona, why don't you go first? Thanks, Fiona said, taking the swizzle sticks gratefully. I'm quite hungry. Did you learn anything from that poetry book? Not as much as I would have liked, Klaus said. Most of the pages were soaked from their journey, and so I couldn't read much. But I believe I've learned a new code. Verse fluctuation declaration. It's a way to communicate by substituting words in poems. I don't understand, Violet said. It is a bit tricky, Klaus said, opening his commonplace book in which he'd copied the information. The book uses a poem called My Last Duchess by Robert Browning as an example. I've read that, Fiona said, twirling a few noodles around a swizzle stick to get them into her mouth. It's a very creepy story about a man who murders his wife. Right, Klaus said. But if a volunteer used the name of the poem in a coded communication, the title might be My Last Wife instead of My Last Duchess, by the poem Obert Browning instead of Robert Browning. What purpose would that serve? Violet said. The volunteer reading it would notice the mistake, Klaus said. The changing of certain words or letters is a kind of fluctuation. If you fixed the fluctuations in the poem, you'd receive your message. Duchess R? Fiona asked. What kind of message is that? I'm not sure, Klaus admitted. The next page in the book is missing. Do you think the missing page is code 2? Violet asked. Klaus shrugged. I don't know, he said. Codes are nothing more than a way of talking so that some people understand and other people don't. Remember when we talked to Quigley in the cave with all the other Snow Scouts listening? Yes, Violet said. We used words that began with V, F, and D so we knew we were all on the same side. Maybe we should have a code ourselves, Fiona said, so that we can communicate if we run into trouble. That's a good idea, Klaus said. What should we use as code words? Food, Sunny suggested. Perfect, Violet said. We'll draw up a list of foods and what they mean in our code. We'll bring them up in conversation and our enemies will never suspect we're actually communicating. And our enemies could be around any corner, Fiona said, handing the fishbowl of lo mein to Violet and picking up the envelope she'd found. Inside this envelope was a letter. Normally I don't like to read other people's mail, but it seems unlikely that this letter will ever reach Gregor Anwhistle. Gregor Anwhistle, Violet said. He's the man who founded the research center. Who was writing to him? A woman named Kit, Fiona said. I think it's Kit Snicket, Jacques' sister. Of course, Klaus said. Your stepfather said she was a noble woman who helped build the Queequeg. According to her letter, Fiona said. Gregor Anwhistle was involved in something called a schism. What is that? It was a big conflict within VFD, Klaus said. Quigley told us a little bit about it. Everybody chose sides, Violet recalled, and now the organization is in chaos. Which side was Gregor on? I don't know, Fiona said, frowning. Some of this letter is in code, and some of it was in water. I can't understand all of it, but it sounds like Gregor was involved with something called volatile fungus deportation. Volatile means unstable, or likely to cause trouble, Klaus said. Fungus, of course, means mushrooms, and deportation means moving something from one place to another. Who was moving unstable mushrooms? VFD, Fiona replied. During the schism, Gregor thought that the medusoid mycelium might be useful. The medusoid mycelium? Violet said, looking nervously at the silent gray mushrooms that still lined the entrance to the small tiled room, their black splotches looking particularly eerie in the dim light. I can't imagine thinking that such deadly things could be useful. Listen to what Kit wrote about it, Fiona said. The poisonous fungus you insist on cultivating in the grotto will bring grim consequences for all of us. Our factory at Lousy Lane can provide some dilution of the mycelium's destructive respiratory capabilities, and you assure me that the mycelium grows best in small enclosed spaces, but this is of little comfort. One mistake, Gregor, and your entire facility would have to be abandoned. Please do not become the thing you dread most by adopting the destructive tactic of our most villainous enemies, playing with fire. Klaus was busy copying Kit Snicket's letter into his commonplace book. Gregor was growing those mushrooms, he said, to use on enemies of VFD. He was going to poison people? Violet asked. Villainous people, Fiona replied, but Kit Snicket thought that using poisonous mushrooms was equally villainous. They were working on a way to weaken the poison, in a factory on Lousy Lane, but the writer of this letter still thought that volatile fungus deportation was too dangerous, and she warned Gregor that if he wasn't careful, the mycelium would poison the entire research center. And now the center is gone, Violet said, and the mycelium remains. Something went very wrong right here where we're sitting. I still don't understand it, Klaus said. Was Gregor a villain? I think he was volatile, Fiona said, like the medusoid mycelium. And the writer of this letter says that if you cultivate something volatile, then you're playing with fire. Violet shuddered, stopped eating her pesto lo mein, and put down the fishbowl. Playing with fire, of course, is an expression that refers to any dangerous or risky activity, such as writing a letter to a volatile person, or journeying through a dark cave filled with poisonous fungus in order to search for an object that was taken away quite some time before. And the Baudelaires did not like to think about the fire they were playing with, or the fires that had already been played with in this damp and mysterious room. For a moment nobody spoke, and the Baudelaires gazed at the stalks and caps of the deadly mushrooms, wondering what had gone wrong with Anwhistle Aquatics. And they wondered how the schism began, and they wondered about all of the mysterious and villainous things that seemed to surround the three orphans, drawing closer and closer as their woeful lives went on, and if such mysteries would ever be solved, and if such villains ever defeated. Wayne, Sunny said suddenly, and the children saw it was true. The crowd of mushrooms seemed to be just a bit smaller, and here and there they saw stalk and cap disappear back into the sand, as if the poisonous fungus had decided to implement an alternate strategy, a phrase which here means would terrorize the Baudelaires in another way. Sunny's right, Klaus said with relief. The medusoid mycelium is waning. Soon it'll be safe enough to return to the Queequeg. It must be a fairly short cycle, Fiona said, making a note in her commonplace book. How long do you think we've been here? All night at least, Violet said, unfolding the sheet of newspaper Sunny had found. It's lucky we found all these materials, otherwise we would have been quite bored. My brother always had a deck of cards with him, Fiona remembered, in case he was stuck in a boring situation. He invented this card game called Fernald's Folly, and we used to play it together whenever we had a long wait. Fernald? Violet asked. Was that your brother's name? Yes, Fiona said. Why do you ask? I was just curious, she said, hurriedly tucking the newspaper into the pocket of her uniform. There was just enough room to slip it next to the tin of wasabi. Aren't you going to tell us what was in the newspaper? Klaus asked. I saw the headline said VFD. I didn't learn anything, Violet said. The article was too blurred to read. Sunny said, and gave her sister a sly look. The youngest Baudelaire had known Violet since she was born, of course, and found it quite easy to tell when she was lying. Violet looked back at Sunny and then at Klaus and shook her head very, very slightly. Why don't we get ready to go? The eldest Baudelaire suggested. By the time we pack up these documents and put on our diving helmets, the fungus will have waned completely. You're right, Fiona said. Here, Sonny, I'll help you get into your helmet. It's the least I can do after you cook such a delicious meal. Chivalrous, Sonny said, which meant, that's very kind of you. And although Fiona had not known Sonny very long, she understood what the youngest Baudelaire had said, more or less, and smiled at all three of the Baudelaire siblings. As the four volunteers suited up, a phrase which here means prepared their helmets for an underwater journey, the Baudelaire children felt as if Fiona fit them like a glove. As a friend, or possibly something more. It felt as if Fiona and the Baudelaires were part of the same team, or the same organization, trying to solve the same mysteries and defeat the same villains. It felt that way to the two younger Baudelaires anyway. Only Violet felt as if their friendship was more volatile, as if Fiona fit her like the wrong glove, or if their friendship had a tiny flaw, a flaw that might turn into a schism. As Violet put the diving helmet over her head and made sure that the zipper of the uniform was zipped tight over the portrait of Herman Melville, she heard the slight rustle of the newspaper clipping in her pocket and frowned. She kept frowning as the last of the mushrooms disappeared into the sand, and the four children stepped carefully back into the icy dark water. Because they were traveling against the tide, the volunteers had decided to hold hands so they would not lose track of one another as they returned to the Queequeg, and as their dark journey began, Violet thought of the dangerous and risky secret concealed in her pocket and realized, as Klaus led the way back to the submarine, with Fiona holding Klaus's hand and Violet holding Fiona's, and Sunny curled in her helmet tucked tightly under Violet's arm, that even while swimming in the icy depths of the ocean, the Baudelaires were playing with fire. The sinister information in the newspaper clipping was like a tiny spore, blossoming in the small enclosed space of Violet's pocket, like a spore of the very deadly medusoid mycelium, which at that very moment was blossoming in the small enclosed space of a diving helmet worn by one of the Baudelaire orphans. End of chapter 7. Catching up, catching up. Spoilers, wasp! How the egg and egg do you clap? Oh, you mean the color top? Yeah. Lousy lousiness. Lousy with lousy lousiness. I think they were lousy. Just a little. Lots of foreshadowing. Listen to the Who and go for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. Your friend, Miles. Happy birthday. Whose birthday? I'm not perfect and I love me. Man, that was easy. Kind of lowers the pressure on myself, really. Spread out and give a shout. Sick rhymes, Fiona. Looks like this grotto belongs to Ariel. You've got a lot to read now? What do you mean? These are thick books, so looks like we're about halfway. Sunny probably coughed and sneezed it in. Thank you for the saying I'll handle it like a pro. Hey, Shannon. Good morning if you're still here. Thank you for shouting out, Shannon. Don't play with fire, kids, otherwise you will oof. That's a great warning. Yellow Dino? I don't know who that is. I meant the chat. Are you guys still hearing the music softly? Oh, hello, Shannon. I hope you're having a great Saturday so far. One moment. You're right, V. I should shout out Shannon again. You probably should. Probably should. I'm going to read 2 more chapters and then we'll call it. So, I'm going to jump right back in. Okay. Jump on it. Jump on it. Okay. Chapter 8. The water cycle consists of 3 phenomena: evaporation, precipitation, and collection. The 3 phenomena know collectively as the 3 phenomena of what is referred to as the water cycle. The second of these phenomena, precipitation, is the process by which vapor turns into water and falls as rain, something you might notice during a rainfall or by going outdoors on a rainy morning, afternoon, evening, or night. This falling water you notice is known as rain, which is the result of the phenomena of precipitation, one of the 3 phenomena that comprise the water cycle. Of these 3 phenomena, precipitation is regarded as the second one, particularly if a list of the 3 phenomena places precipitation in the middle, or second, spot on the list. Precipitation is quite simply a term for the transformation of vapor into water, which then falls as rain, something you might encounter if you were to step outside during a rainstorm. Rain consists of water, which was formerly vapor, but underwent the process known as precipitation, one of the 3 phenomena in the water cycle, and by now this tedious description must have put you back to sleep so you may avoid the gruesome details of my account of Violet, Klaus, and Sunny Baudelaire as they made their way through the Gregorian Grotto back to the Queequeg. The Baudelaire orphans knew that something was wrong, the moment they arrived at the submarine, knocked on the metal hatch, and heard no answer from the captain inside. It had been a dark and cold journey back to the cave, through the cave, made all the more difficult by the fact that they were swimming against the tide, rather than letting the current carry them along. Klaus, who was leading the way, swept one arm in front of him from side to side, fearful that he would miss the Queequeg altogether, or brush his hand against something sinister lurking in the cavern. Fiona trembled throughout the entire journey, and Violet could feel her nervous fingers twitching as she held her hand. And Sunny tried not to panic inside her diving helmet as her siblings' swim made her bounce up and down in the blackness. The youngest Baudelaire could not see a single light through the small round window in her helmet, but as with all of the Baudelaires, she concentrated on arriving safely, and the thought of returning to the Queequeg felt like a small light glowing in the gloom of the grotto. Soon the Baudelaires thought they would hear the booming "I" of Captain Widdershins as he welcomed them back from their mission. Perhaps Phil would have cooked them a nice hot meal, even without the culinary assistance of Sunny. And perhaps the telegram device would have received another volunteer factual dispatch, one that might help them find the sugar bowl so their entire journey would not have been a fool's errand. But when Klaus led them to the hatch, they found no sign that anyone aboard the Queequeg was welcoming them. After knocking for several minutes, the worried children had to open the hatch by themselves, a difficult task in the dark, and enter the passageway, quickly closing the hatch behind them. They grew more worried as they discovered nobody had activated the hatch, so quite a bit of water had flowed into the passageway and poured down to the room in which the Baudelaires had first met Captain Widdershins. They could hear the water splashing on the submarine floor as they began their climb down, and strained to hear the captain shouting, "Aye, what a mess!" or "Aye, the valve is broken!" or even something optimistic from Phil like, "Look on the bright side, it's like having a wading pool." "Captain Widdershins," Violet called, her voice muffled through her helmet. "Stepfather?" Fiona called, her voice muffled through hers. "Phil?" Klaus called. "Crew?" Sunny called. Nobody answered these calls, and nobody commented on the water from the passageway. And when the volunteers reached the end of the passageway and lowered themselves into the small dim room, they found nobody there to meet them. "Stepfather?" Fiona called again, but they heard only the movement of the water as it settled into a large puddle on the floor. Without bothering to take off their helmets, the 4 children splashed through the water and hurried down the hallway, past the plaque with the captain's personal philosophy engraved on it until they reached the main hall. The room was just as enormous as ever, of course, with all the bewildering pipes, panels, and warning signs, although it seemed as if the place had been tidied up a bit. And there was now a tiny bit of decoration near the wooden table where the Baudelaires had eaten Sunny's chowder and planned their journey through the Gregorian Grotto. Tied to 3 chairs were small blue balloons that hovered in the air, and each balloon had a letter printed on its surface in thick black ink. The first balloon read V, the second read F, and only someone as dim as an underwater cave would be surprised to hear that the third read D. "VFD, Violet said. "Do you think it's a code?" "I'm not interested in codes at the moment," Fiona said, her voice tense and echoey inside her helmet. "I want to find my crewmates. Look around, everyone." The Baudelaires looked around the room, but it seemed as empty and lonely as the grotto. Without the enormous presence of Captain Widdershins, Enormous presence is a phrase which here means large physical size, combined with a vibrant personality and loud voice. The main hall seemed utterly deserted. Maybe they're in the kitchen, Klaus said, although it sounded as if he didn't believe it himself. Or napping in the barracks? They wouldn't have napped, Violet said. They said they'd be watching us the entire time. Fiona took a step toward the door to the kitchen, but then stopped and looked at the wooden table. Their helmets are gone, she said. Both Phil and my stepfather were keeping their diving helmets on the table in case of an emergency. She ran her hand along the table as if she could make the helmets reappear. They're gone, she said. They've left the Queequeg. I can't believe that, Klaus said, shaking his head. They knew we were traveling through the grotto. They wouldn't abandon their fellow volunteers. Maybe they thought we weren't coming back, Fiona said. No, Violet said, pointing to a panel on the wall. They could see us. We were tiny green dots on the sonar detector. The children looked at the sonar panel, hoping to see dots that might represent their missing crewmates. They must have had a very good reason to leave, Fiona said. What reason could there be? Klaus said. No matter what occurred, they would have waited for us. No, Fiona said. Sadly, she removed her diving helmet, and the middle Baudelaire saw she had tears in her eyes. No matter what occurred, she said, my stepfather wouldn't have hesitated. He or she who hesitates is lost. Klaus finished for her and put his hand on her shoulder. Maybe they didn't go of their own volition, Violet said, using a phrase which here means by choice. Maybe somebody took them. Took the crew away, Klaus said, and left behind 3 balloons? It's a mystery, Violet said, but I'm sure it's one we could solve. Let's just take off our helmets and get to work. Klaus nodded and removed his diving helmet, putting it down on the floor next to Fiona's. Violet removed hers and then went to open the tiny door of Sunny's helmet so the youngest Baudelaire could uncurl herself from the small enclosed space and join her siblings. But Fiona grabbed Violet's hand before it reached the helmet and stopped her, pointing through the small round window in Sunny's helmet. There are many things in this world that are difficult to see. An ice cube in a glass of water, for instance, might pass unnoticed, particularly if the ice cube is small and the glass of water is 10 miles in diameter. A short woman might be difficult to see on a crowded city street, particularly if she has disguised herself as a mailbox and people keep putting letters in her mouth. And a small ceramic bowl with a tight-fitting lid to keep something important inside might be difficult to find in the laundry room of an enormous hotel, particularly if there were a terrible villain nearby, making you feel nervous and distracted. But there are also things that are difficult to see not because of the size of their surroundings, or a clever disguise, or a treacherous person with a book of matches in his pocket and a fiendish plot in his brain, but because the things are so upsetting to look at, so distressing to believe, that it is as if your eyes refuse to see what is right in front of them. You can glance into a mirror and not see how old you are growing, or how unattractive your hairstyle has become, until someone kindly points these things out to you. You can gaze upon a place you once lived and not see how terribly the building has changed or how sinister the neighborhood has become, until you walk a few paces to an ice cream store and notice that your favorite flavor has been discontinued. And you can stare into the small round window of a diving helmet, as Violet and Klaus did at that moment, and not see the stalks and caps of a terrible gray fungus growing poisonously on the glass, until someone utters its scientific name in a horrified whisper.
Oh, bother. Oh, bother. Oh, bother. Oh, bother. 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 Oh, bother. Oh, bother. Oh, help and bother. Oh, bother. Oh, bother.
It's the medusoid mycelium, Fiona said, and the 2 elder Baudelaires blinked and saw that it was so. Oh no, Violet murmured. Oh no! Get her out! Klaus cried. Get Sunny out at once or she'll be poisoned! No! Fiona said and snatched the helmet away from the siblings. She put it down on the table as if it were a tureen, a word which here means a wide, deep dish used for serving stew or soup, instead of a small, terrified girl curled up in a piece of deep-sea equipment. The diving helmet can serve as a quarantine. If we open it, the fungus will spread. The entire submarine could become a field of mushrooms. We can't leave our sister in there, Violet cried. The spores will poison her. She's probably been poisoned already, Fiona said quietly. In a small enclosed space like that helmet, there is no way she could escape. That can't be true, Klaus said, taking off his glasses as if refusing to see the horror of their situation. But at that moment their predicament became perfectly clear, as the children heard a small, eerie sound come from the helmet. It reminded Violet and Klaus of the fish of the stricken stream, struggling to breathe in the ashy black waters. Sunny was coughing. "Sunny!" Klaus shouted into the helmet. "Melody," Sunny said, which meant, "I'm beginning to feel unwell." "Don't talk, Sunny!" Fiona called through the tiny window of the helmet and turned to the elder Baudelaires. "The mycelium has destructive respiratory capabilities," the mycologist explained, walking over to the sideboard. "That's what it said in that letter. Your sister should save her breath. The spores will make it more and more difficult for Sunny to talk, and she'll probably start coughing as the fungus grows inside her. In an hour's time, she won't be able to breathe. It would be fascinating if it wasn't so horrible." "Fascinating?" Violet covered her mouth with her hands and shut her eyes, trying not to imagine what her terrified sister was feeling. "What can we do?" she asked. "We can make an antidote," Fiona said. "There must be some useful information in my mycological library." "I'll help," Klaus said. "I'm sure I'll find the books difficult to read, but..." "No," Fiona said. "I need to be alone to do my research. You and Violet should climb that rope ladder and fire up the engine so we can get out of this cave." "But we should all do research," Violet cried. "If we only have an hour, or maybe even less. If the mushrooms grew while we swam back to the Queequeg, then we certainly don't have time to argue," Fiona finished, opening the cabinet and removing a large pile of books. "I order you to leave me alone so I can do this research and save your sister." The elder Baudelaires looked at one another, and then at the diving helmet on the table. "You order us?" Klaus asked. "Aye," Fiona cried, and the children realized it was the first time the mycologist had uttered that word. "I'm in charge here. With my stepfather gone, I am the captain of the Queequeg. Aye." "It doesn't matter who the captain is," Violet said. "The important thing is to save my sister." "Climb up that rope ladder," Fiona cried. "Aye, fire up those engines. Aye, we're going to save Sunny. Aye, and find my stepfather. Aye, and retrieve the sugar bowl. Aye. It's no time to hesitate. She who hesitates is lost. That's my personal philosophy." "That's the captain's personal philosophy," Klaus said, "not yours." "I am the captain," Fiona said fiercely. The middle Baudelaire could see that behind her triangular glasses the mycologist was crying. "Go and do what I say." Klaus opened his mouth to say something more, but found that he too was crying, and without another word turned from his friend and walked over to the rope ladder with Violet following behind. "She's wrong," the eldest Baudelaire whispered furiously. "You know she's wrong, Klaus. What are we going to do?" "We're going to fire up the engines," Klaus said, "and steer the Queequeg out of this cave." "That will not save Sunny," Violet said. "Don't you remember the description of the medusoid mycelium?" "A single spore has such grim power," Klaus recited, "that you may die within the hour. Of course I remember." "Hour?" Sunny said fearfully from inside her helmet. "Shush," Violet said. "Save your breath, Sunny. We'll find a way to cure you right away." "Not right away," Klaus corrected sadly. "Fiona is the captain now, and she ordered us." "I don't care about Fiona's orders," Violet said. "She's too volatile to get us out of this situation, just like her stepfather and just like her brother." The eldest Baudelaire reached into the pocket of her uniform and drew out the newspaper clipping that she had taken from the grotto. Her hand brushed against the tin of wasabi, and she shivered, hoping that her sister would recuperate and live to use the Japanese condiment in one of her recipes. "Listen to this, Klaus." "I don't want to listen," Klaus said in an angry whisper. "Maybe Fiona is right. Maybe we shouldn't hesitate, particularly at a time like this. If we don't get an antidote to our sister, she might perish. Hesitating is only going to make things worse." "Firing up the engines instead of helping Fiona with her research will only make things worse," Violet said. At that moment, however, both Violet and Klaus saw something that made things worse, and they realized they had both been wrong. The two Baudelaires shouldn't have been firing up the engines of the Queequeg, and they shouldn't have been helping Fiona with her research, and they shouldn't have been arguing with one another. The Baudelaires and Fiona, too, should have been standing very still, trying not to make even the smallest noise, and instead of looking at the diving helmet where their sister was suffering under the poison of the medusoid mycelium, they should have been looking at the submarine sonar detector, or out of the porthole over the table, which looked out into the dark depths of the cave. On the green panel was the glowing Q, representing the Queequeg, but this was another thing in the world that was difficult to see because another glowing green symbol was occupying the very same space. and outside the porthole was a mass of small metal tubes circling in the gloomy water and making thousands and thousands of bubbles. And in the middle of all those tubes was a large open space, like a gigantic hungry mouth. The mouth of an octopus, about to devour the Queequeg and all its remaining crew. The image on the sonar detector, of course, was an eye, and the view from the porthole was of a submarine. But either way, the children knew it was Count Olaf, and that made things much, much worse indeed. It's the end of chapter 8. What, you guys don't like the water cycle? Yes, I hope you're well, Shannon. Great British accent. 5 stars from a British person. Thank you. Small balloons. If those were red, I'd assume Pennywise was behind this decor. Man, I'm a pro at guessing when Pennywise will randomly appear in things. The music is good levels. Probably should have answered. Oh, that's okay. No worries. Yeah, if you could just do me a favor and not test out sound effects until I'm done reading, that would be fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, job is a sound effect. Violet's always defying orders. Yeah, koalas whenever I tell everybody we should take a nap. Alright, one more chapter and then I'll be done for the day. And then I'll eat some lunch because my stomach just keeps growling. Alright. Chapter 9. If you are considering a life of villainy, and I certainly hope you are not, there are a few things that appear to be necessary to every villain's success. One thing is a villainous disregard for other people, so that a villain may talk to his or her victims impolitely, ignore their pleas for mercy, and even behave violently toward them if the villain is in the mood for that sort of thing. Another thing villains require is a villainous imagination, so that they might spend their free time dreaming up treacherous schemes in order to further their villainous careers. Villains require a small group of villainous cohorts, which can be persuaded to serve the villain in a hench personal capacity. And villains need to develop a villainous laugh, so that they may simultaneously celebrate their villainous deeds and frighten whatever non-villainous people happen to be nearby. A successful villain should have all of these things at his or her villainous fingertips, or else give up villainy altogether and try to lead a life of decency, integrity, and kindness, which is much more challenging and noble, if not always quite as exciting. Count Olaf, of course, was an excellent villain, a phrase which here means someone particularly skilled at villainy, rather than a villain with several desirable qualities. And the Baudelaire orphans had known this soon after that terrible day at Briny Beach, when the children learned of the terrible fire that began so many of the unfortunate events in their lives. But as the Queequeg tumbled into the mouth of his dreadful octopus submarine, it seemed to the orphans that the villain had become even more villainous during his brief absence from their lives. Olaf had proven his villainous disregard for other people over and over, from his vicious murder of the children's guardians to his affinity for arson, a phrase which here means enthusiasm for burning down buildings no matter how many people are inside. But the children realized that Olaf's disregard had become even more dreadful, as the Queequeg passed through the gaping mouth and was roughly tossed from side to side in a mechanical imitation of swallowing, forcing Violet and Klaus, and Fiona too, of course, to hang on for dear life as the main hull rolled this way and that, spinning Sunny in her helmet like a watermelon in a washing machine. The Count had displayed his villainous imagination on a number of occasions, from his dastardly schemes to steal the Baudelaire fortune to his nefarious plots to kidnap Duncan and Isadora Quagmire. But the siblings gazed out of the porthole and saw that Olaf's infernal imagination had run utterly wild in decorating this terrible submarine. For the Queequeg rolled along a rumbling tunnel that was almost as dark and threatening as the Gorgonian Grotto, with every inch of its metallic walls covered in eerie glowing eyes. The Count always had an assortment of cohorts, from his original theatrical troupe, many of whom were no longer with him, to some former employees of Caligari Carnival. But the orphan saw that he had lured many others to join him when the tunnel rounded a corner and the elder Baudelaires had a brief glimpse of an enormous room full of people rowing long metal oars, activating the terrible metal arms of that octopus. And perhaps worst of all, when the Queequeg finally came to a shuddering stop and Violet and Klaus looked out of the porthole, they learned that the villain had clearly been rehearsing his villainous laugh until it was extra wicked and more theatrical than ever. Count Olaf was standing on a small metal platform with a triumphant grin on his face, dressed in a familiar suit made of slippery-looking material, but with a portrait of another author whom only a very devoted reader would recognize, and when he peered through the porthole and spied the frightened children, he opened his mouth and began his new villainous laugh, which included new wheezes, bonus snarls, and an assortment of strange syllables the Baudelaires had never heard. "Ha ha ha, heepa heepa ho," he cried. "Tee hee tort tort tort. Ha cha ha ha. Sniggle he. Ha, if I do say so myself." With a boastful gesture, he hopped off the platform, drew a long, sharp sword, and quickly traced a circle on the glass of the porthole. Violet and Klaus covered their ears as the sword shrieked its way around the window. Then with one flick of his sword, Olaf sent the glass circle tumbling into the main hall, where it lay unbroken on the floor, and leaped through the porthole onto the large wooden table to laugh at them further. "I'm splitting my sides," he cried. "I'm rolling in the aisles. I'm nauseous with mirth. I'm rattling with glee. I'm seriously considering compiling a joke book from all the hilarious things bouncing around in my brain. Hup, hup, ha, ha, hammy, hee, hee." Violet dashed forward and grabbed the helmet in which Sunny was still curled so Olaf would not kick it as he pranced triumphantly on top of the table. She could not bear to think of her sister who was inhaling the poison of the medusoid mycelium as Olaf wasted precious minutes performing his tiresome new laugh. "Stop laughing, Count Olaf," she said. "There's nothing funny about villainy." "Sure there is," Olaf crowed. "Ha ha hat rack! Just think of it. I made my way down the mountain and found pieces of your toboggan scattered all over some very sharp rocks. Tee hee torpid sniggle. I thought you had drowned in the stricken stream and were swimming with all those coughing fishes. Ho ho hagfish. I was broken-hearted." "You were not broken-hearted," Klaus said. "You've tried to destroy us plenty of times." "That's why I was broken-hearted!" Olaf cried. "Ho ho sniggle. I personally planned to slaughter you Baudelaires myself, after I had your fortune, of course, and pry the sugar bowl out of your dead fingers or toes." Violet and Klaus looked at one another hurriedly. They'd almost forgotten telling Olaf that they knew the location of the sugar bowl, even though of course they had no idea of its whereabouts. "To cheer myself up," the villain continued, "I met my associates at the Hotel Denouement, where they were cooking up a little scheme of their own, and convinced them to lend me a handful of our new recruits." The elder Baudelaires knew that the associates were the man with a beard with no hair, and a woman with hair but no beard, so two people so sinister that even Olaf seemed to find them a bit frightening, and that the new recruits were a group of snow scouts that these villains had recently kidnapped. "Tee-hee, turncoat! Thanks to their generosity, I was able to get this submarine working again! Sniggle ha ho ho! Of course, I need to be back to at the Hotel Denouement before Thursday, but in the meantime, I had a few days to kill, so I thought I'd kill some of my old enemies! Hee hee, Halbert Sniggle! So I began roaming around the sea, looking for Captain Wittershins and his idiotic submarine on my sonar detector. Tee-hee, teletaxis! But now that I've captured the Queequeg, I find you Baudelaires aboard. It's hilarious. It's humorous. It's droll. It's relatively amusing." "How dare you capture this submarine?" Fiona cried. "I'm the captain of the Queequeg, and I demand that you return us to the sea at once. Count Olaf peered down at the mycologist. "I," he repeated. "You must be Fiona. That little fungus freak. Why, you're all grown up. The last time I saw you, I was trying to throw thumbtacks into your cradle. Ha ha hoi polloi. What happened to Wittershins? Why isn't he the captain?" "My stepfather is not around at the moment," Fiona replied, blinking behind her triangular glasses. Tee-hee, terry cloth," Count Olaf said. "Your stepfather's abandoned you, eh? Well, I suppose it was only a matter of time. Your whole family could never choose which side of the schism was theirs. Your brother used to be a goody-goody as well, trying to prevent fires instead of encouraging them, but eventually, my stepfather has not abandoned me," Fiona said, though her voice faltered a bit, a phrase which here means sounded as if she weren't so sure. She did not even add an I to her sentence. "We'll see about that," Olaf said, grinning wickedly. I'm gonna lock all of you in the brig, which is the official seafaring term for jail. We know what the brig is, Klaus said. Then you know it's not a very pleasant place, the villain said. The previous owner used it to hold traitors captive, and I see no reason to break with tradition. We're not traitors, and we're not leaving the Queequeg, Violet said, and held up the diving helmet. Sunny tried to say something, but the growing fungus made her cough instead, and Olaf frowned at the coughing helmet. What's that? He demanded. Sunny is in here, she said, and she's very ill. I was wondering where the baby was, Count Olaf said. I was hoping she was trapped underneath my shoe, but I see it's just some ridiculous book. He lifted his slippery foot to reveal Mushroom Minute, the book Fiona had been using for her research, and kicked it off the table where it skittered into a far corner. There's a very deadly poison inside that helmet, Fiona said, staring at the book in frustration. Aye, if Sunny does not receive an antidote within the hour, she will perish. What do I care? Olaf growled, once again showing his villainous disregard for other people. I only need one Baudelaire to get my hands on the fortune. Now come with me. Ha ha, handiwork. We're staying right here, Klaus said. Our sister's life depends on it. Count Olaf drew his sword again and traced a sinister shape in the air. I'll tell you what your lives depend on, he said. Your lives depend on me. If I wanted, I could drown you in the sea or have you strangled by the arms of the mechanical octopus. It's only out of the kindness of my heart and because of my own greed that I'm locking you in the brig instead. Sunny coughed inside her helmet, and Violet thought quickly. If you let us help our sister, she said, we'll tell you where the sugar bowl is. Count Olaf's eyes narrowed, and he gave the children a wide, toothy grin the two Baudelaires remembered from so many of their troubled times. His eyes shone brightly as if he were telling a joke as nasty as his unbrushed teeth. You can't try that trick again, he sneered. I'm not going to bargain with an orphan, no matter how pretty she may be. Once you get to the brig, you'll reveal where the sugar bowl is, once my henchman gets his hands on you. Or should I say, hooks. Tee-hee torture. Count Olaf leaped back through the porthole as Violet and Klaus looked at one another in fear. They knew Count Olaf was referring to the hook-handed man who'd been working with the villain as long as they had known him, and was one of their least favorite of Olaf's comrades. I could race up the rope ladder, Violet murmured to the others, and fire up the engines of the Queequeg. We can't take the submarine underwater with the window gone, Fiona said. We'd drown. Klaus put his ear to the diving helmet and heard his sister whimper and then cough. But how can we save Sunny? He asked. Time is running out. Fiona eyed the far corner of the room. I'll take that book with me, she said, and hurry up! Count Olaf cried. I can't stand around all day. I have plenty of people to boss around. Aye, Fiona said, as Violet, still holding Sunny, led Klaus through the porthole to join Count Olaf on the platform. I'll be there in a second, she said, and the mycologist took one hesitant step toward Mushroom Minute. You'll be there now, Olaf growled and shook his sword at her. He who hesitates is lost, he sniggle. At the mention of the captain's personal philosophy, Fiona sighed and stopped her furtive journey, a phrase which here means sneaking toward the mycological book. Oh, she said quietly, and stepped through the porthole to join the Baudelaires. On the way to the brig, I'll give you the grand tour, Olaf announced, leading the way out of the round metal room that was serving as a sort of brig for the Queequeg itself. There were several inches of water on the floor to help the captured submarine move through the tunnel, and the Baudelaire's boots made loud, wet splashes as they followed the boasting villain. While Sunny coughed again in her helmet, Olaf pressed an eye on the wall, and a small door slid open with a sinister whisper to reveal a corridor. This submarine is one of the greatest things I've ever stolen, he bragged. It has everything I'll need to defeat VFD once and for all. It has a sonar system so I can read the seas of VFD submarines. It has an enormous fly swatter so I can rid the skies of VFD planes. It has a lifetime supply of matches so I can rid the world of VFD headquarters. It has several cases of wine that I plan to drink up myself, and a closet full of very stylish outfits for my girlfriend. And best of all, it has plenty of opportunities for children to do hard labor. Ha ha, hedonism. Gesturing with his sword, he led the children around a corner into an enormous room, the room they had a glimpse of as the Queequeg tumbled inside this terrible place. It was quite dark, with only a few lanterns hanging from the tops of tall pillars scattered around the room, but Violet and Klaus could see 2 large rows of uncomfortable-looking wooden benches on which sat a crowd of children, hurriedly working long oars that stretched across the room and even beyond the walls, where they slid through metal holes in order to control the tentacles of the octopus. The elder Baudelaires recognized some of the children from a troop of snow scouts they had encountered in the Mortmain Mountains, and a few looked quite a bit like other students at Prufrock Preparatory School, where the siblings had first encountered Carmelita Spatz. But some of the others were children with whom the Baudelaires had had no prior experience, a phrase which here means who had probably been kidnapped by Count Olaf or his associates on another occasion. The children looked very weary, quite hungry, and more than a little bored as they worked the metal oars back and forth. In the very center of the room appeared to be another octopus, this one made of slippery cloth. 6 of the octopus's arms hung limply at his sides, but 2 of them were waving high in the air, one of them clutching what looked like a long, damp noodle. "Row faster, you stupid brats!" the octopus cried in a familiar, wicked voice. "We have to get to the Hotel Denouement before Thursday, and it's Monday already. If you don't hurry up, I'm going to hit you with this tagliatelle grande. I warn you, being struck with a large piece of pasta is an unpleasant and somewhat sticky experience. Ho ho sniggle." "Hee hee snaggle," Olaf cried in agreement, and the octopus whirled around. "Darling," it cried, and the siblings were not surprised to see that it was Esme Squalor, Count Olaf's treacherous girlfriend, in another one of her absurd stylish outfits. Using the slippery cloth of the submarine's uniforms, the villainous girlfriend had fashioned an octopus dress, with 2 large plastic eyes, 6 extra sleeves, and suction cups stuck all over her boots, just as real octopi have on their tentacles to help them move around. Esme took a few sticky steps toward Olaf and then peered at the children beneath the slippery hood of the dress. "Are these the Baudelaires?" she asked in astonishment. "How can that be? We already celebrated their deaths." "Turns out they survived," Count Olaf said. "But their good luck is about to come to an end. I'm taking them to the brig." "The baby has certainly grown," Esme said, peering at Fiona. "But she's just as ugly as she ever was." No, Olaf said. "The baby's locked up in that helmet, coughing her little lungs out. This is Fiona, Captain Witterson's stepdaughter. The captain abandoned her." "Abandoned her?" Esme repeated. "How in! How stylish! How marvelous! This calls for more of our new laughter. Ha ha, hedgehog!" "Tee-hee tempeh," Olaf cackled. "Life just keeps getting better and better." "Sniggle ho ho!" Esme shrieked. "Our triumph is just around the corner." "Ha ha, Hepplewhite!" Olaf crowed. "VFD will be reduced to ashes forever." "Giggle giggle glandular problems," Esme cried. "We're going to be painfully wealthy." "Heepa deepa ho ho ha!" Olaf shouted. "The world will always remember the name of this wonderful submarine." "What is the name of this submarine?" Fiona asked, and to the children's relief the villains stopped their irritating laughter. Olaf glared at the mycologist and then looked at the ground. "The Carmelita," he admitted quietly. "I wanted to call it the Olaf, but somebody made me change it." "The Olaf is a cake-sniffing name," cried a rude voice the siblings had hoped to never hear again, and I'm sorry to say that Carmelita Spatz skipped into the room, sneering at the Baudelaires as she did so. Carmelita had always been the sort of unpleasant person who believed that she was prettier and smarter than everybody else, and Violet and Klaus saw instantly that she had become even more spoiled under the care of Olaf and Esme. She was dressed in an outfit perhaps even more absurd than Esme Squalor's, in different shades of pink so blinding that Violet and Klaus had to squint in order to look at her. Around her waist was a wide frilly tutu, which is a skirt used during ballet performances, and on her head was an enormous pink crown decorated with light pink ribbons and dark pink flowers. She had 2 pink wings taped to her back, 2 pink hearts drawn on her cheeks, and 2 different pink shoes on each foot that made unpleasant slapping sounds as she walked. Around her neck was a stethoscope, such as doctors use, with pink puffballs pasted all over it, and in one hand she had a long pink wand with a bright pink star at the end of it. "Stop looking at my outfit!" she commanded the Baudelaire scornfully. "You're just jealous of me because I'm a tap-dancing ballerina fairy princess veterinarian." "You look adorable, darling," purred Esme, patting her on the crown. "Doesn't she look adorable, Olaf?" "I suppose so," Count Olaf muttered. "I wish you would ask me before taking disguises from my trunk." "But, County, I needed your disguises!" Carmelita whined, batting her eyelashes, which were covered in pink glitter. I needed a special outfit for my special tap dancing ballerina fairy princess veterinarian dance recital. Several of the children groaned at their oars. Please no, cried one of the Snow Scouts. Her dance recitals last for hours. Have mercy on us, cried another child. Carmelita Spatz is the most talented dancer in the entire universe, Esme growled, snapping the noodle over the rowers' heads. You brats should be grateful that she is performing for you. It'll help you row. Ugh, Sunny could not help saying from inside her helmet, as if the idea of Carmelita's dance recital were making her even sicker. The elder Baudelaires looked at one another and tried to imagine how they could help their young sibling. I think we have a pink cape aboard the Queequeg, Klaus said hurriedly. It would look perfect on Carmelita. I could just run back to the submarine and... I don't want your old clothes, you cake sniffer, Carmelita said scornfully. A tap-dancing ballerina fairy princess veterinarian does not wear hand-me-downs. Isn't she precious? Esme cooed. She's like the adopted child I never had, except for you, Baudelaires, of course, but I never liked you much. Are you going to stay and watch me, County? Carmelita asked. This is going to be the most special dance recital in the whole wide world. There's too much work to do, Count Olaf said hastily. I have to throw these children in the brig so my associate can force them to reveal the location of the sugar bowl. You like that sugar bowl more than me, Carmelita pouted. Of course we don't, darling, Esme said. Olaf, tell her that sugar bowl does not mean a thing to you. Tell her she's like a wonderful marshmallow in the middle of our lives. You're a marshmallow, Carmelita, Olaf said and pushed the children out of the enormous room. I'll see you later. Tell Hooky to be extra vicious with those brats, Esme cried, whipping the Tagliatelle Grande over her fake octopus head. And now, on with the show! Count Olaf ushered the children out of the room as Carmelita Spatz began tapping and twirling in front of the rowers. The elder Baudelaires were almost grateful to go to the brig, rather than being forced to watch a tap-dancing ballerina fairy princess veterinarian dance recital. Olaf dragged them down another hallway that twisted every which way, curving to the right and to the left as if it were a snake the mechanical octopus had eaten, and finally stopped in front of a small door with a metal eye where the doorknob ought to have been. This is the brig, Count Olaf cried. Ha ha, haberdashery. Sunny coughed once more from inside her helmet, a rough, loud cough that sounded worse than before. The medusoid mycelium was clearly continuing its ghastly growth, and Violet tried one more time to convince the villain to let them help her. Please let us go back to the Queequeg, she said. Can you not hear her coughing? Yes, Count Olaf said, but I don't care. Please, Klaus cried. This is a matter of life and death. It certainly is, Count Olaf sneered, turning the knob. My associate will make you reveal the location of the sugar bowl if he has to tear you apart to do it. Listen to my friends, Fiona said. We're in a terrible situation. Oh, I wouldn't say that, Count Olaf said with a wicked smile, as the door creaked open to reveal a small, bare room. There was nothing in it but a small stool at which a man sat, shuffling a deck of cards with quite a bit of difficulty. How could a family reunion be a terrible situation? Olaf said and shoved the children inside the room, slamming the door behind them. Violet and Klaus faced Olaf's associate and turned the diving helmet so Sunny could face him too. The siblings were not surprised, of course, that the person shuffling the cards was the hook-handed man, and they were not at all happy to see him, and they were quite scared that their time in the brig would make it impossible to save Sunny from the mushrooms growing inside her helmet. But when they looked at Fiona, they saw that the mycologist was quite surprised at who she saw in the brig, and quite happy to see the man who stood up from his stool and waved his hooks in amazement. Fiona! The hook-handed man cried. Fernald! Fiona said, and it seemed they might just save Sunny, after all. It's the end of chapter 9, and the last chapter I'll read for today. Let me catch up. Lunchy Munchy Hype. Enthusiasm for arson. What? Heepa heepa ho. You might as well use what the brig is for. Shame to let it go to waste. Is that when someone tickles you to death? Probably. Hi, Hammer, if you're still here. Haha, Hedgehog. Guess Esme was thinking of the original design of Sonic. 26 hours and 14 minutes. Woo, that's a lot. Carmelvita. Veterinarian. You're right, Carmelita. Nobody likes you. Hi, Carly. They had such good casting for the series about these books. Good to see you, Carly. Happy Saturday. Yes, it was around then. Caden. That I was in the Stranger Things. Hi, bye, Moocher. Hope you're doing well. I'm doing pretty good, Hammer. Thanks. Alright, guys. Well, that's all we're going to read for today. Leaving it off on that cliffhanger, you know. We'll read the last 4 chapters. Yeah, last 4 chapters the next time we're all together for this. I'm sick, but it was nice to watch stream and have some company. Well, I'm glad that I was streaming and it was something that you could watch while you were sick. I'm sorry that you're sick. I do hope you feel better soon. All the best to you always, of course. Alright, guys. Well, I'm going to go eat some lunch and then get ready for work. So I will see you guys later. I have not even planned streams for next week, so I don't know when I'll be streaming next. But it'll probably be soon, in Monday or Tuesday or something. So I will let you guys go. Have a great rest of the day. Have a wonderful time. As always, much love from me to you. I'll see you all soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye.